And happy Saturday and 4th of July weekend to you. Hi, I'm Tina Brock. I'm your host for Into the Absurd, a virtually existential dinner conversation. And thank you for joining us today on this holiday weekend. On today's show, Darnelle Edwin Radford. And Darnelle is a producer here in Philadelphia. And we're going to talk to him about the companies that he has formed, all the many hats that he wears. And we'd like to invite you to join in on that conversation as well. So put your questions for Darnelle in the chat today. And if you're joining us on Facebook, if you are joining us around the world, thank you so much for following Into the Absurd. It's our pleasure to be here every Saturday at 5 p.m. talking about what motivates artists in our community, around the country, and around the world. And speaking of motivated artists, Darnelle Radford. Darnelle has been, gosh, I've known Darnelle as an artist, as all the many hats that he wears here for a number of years. And I wanted to find out his views on being a producer. He has started a number of companies, represented Theatre Company and Em3ry, and he is the host and producer of Rep Radio, now in its 12th season, and the Broad Street Review podcast, now in its 5th season. So he's also an IT guy, a photographer, a baker, a writer, an analyst, and a consultant, and all of these many hats come together as a producer. So I'd like to welcome to the table Darnelle Edwin Radford. Welcome to Into the Absurd.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for being on, Darnelle. One of my favorite things is to talk to other producers because there's so much to talk about. And since you have so much background in so many different areas, I thought it would be fun to see what you're thinking, what's on the table, and how the many different roads that you've taken in your life have converged, and what you're thinking about, now as we were talking about before the show, coming out of this last year, and how interesting it's going to be to see things building and changing, and what will come of that. I think for my first question, I'm curious as to when you set out on the road many years ago, was producer one of the things that you thought about?
No. I actually,
Who does,
I started
right?
out exactly. I feel like you do stumble into it because you may have sort of an artistic idea, and then you think about, well, how do I put this out into the world? And then you realize you'll have to produce it yourself. So I started in a play production class when I went to community college in South Jersey. And I took this play production class, and there was, our final project was to focus on one part of theater production. And I could have lit a bar stool, 3-point lighting, and that would have been my, I would have gotten great off of that. And I just said, if I write a play and produce it, the mindset then was it could be half-assed and it would still be good because all of those pieces were factored in. But it just came from a loose thing. It was like, I can touch on all of these things without having to focus specifically on one. And then it turned out that is where my interests lie. I do want to bring all of these things to the table. So it was fitting. I did write the play. And it was site specific. It ended up being set in the teacher's lounge at the college, which had this aesthetic because it once was the restaurant for the culinary students. And so it had this good look, and we changed the fluorescent overheads with a gel, and we set up this coffee shop because the play was set in a coffee shop. And that was it. We went and processed that, and I really didn't know what was going to happen beyond that with that piece. And I originally thought, oh, I could maybe turn this into a film, so I ended up coming to Philadelphia, and I went to the Art Institute of Philadelphia, and I originally started in video production. And going through the classes there, it seemed like they were grooming us to be editors, and it wasn't really a place I wanted to be. I was like, I don't know if that's exactly what I want to do. So I switched to multimedia and web design because I figured no matter what I do, I'm going to need a web presence.
Mhm.
So then I moved towards that. And every time someone talked to me about my time at college, they would say, "So what are you going to do once you graduate?" I said, "I'm going to go back to school for theater." I was like, well, why am I going back to school for theater? It just, I don't know why I didn't go first.
Mhm.
But I don't think it was the guidance at first to
Mhm.
pursue a career in theater. But then I ended up starting a company.
Well, so you wrote the play and you were in the play as well as an actor?
I was, let's see, was I in that? No, I definitely directed it. Um, there were times where I had remounted it and I played some of the characters, but the original production I was not in. I was the director. Um, but I never saw myself being out front, being on the stage. I wanted to create a space for players to play.
Hmm.
And so I think that that's why the idea of writing the play, I can create this story. I didn't even have a specific story I wanted to tell. I just said I want to figure out how I can get a bunch of characters into a box. And that's, they're coming to this coffee shop for an open mic night. And so that was the concept. And all of these characters came from different walks of life. One was going through a breakup, one is the barista, another is, you know, they had so many different things that brought them there for that night. And, as I was realizing those characters, I was saying, I could take any one of these characters and run with their story
Mhm.
and continue to tell stories in this world. And I think that's why I thought about film, because they do that in television a lot, especially when you see a television series like a sitcom. Um, a sitcom will have a spin-off when there's a popular character, so you can follow their lives and continue going on. And I thought about it like that. I was like, well, these characters have lives outside of this coffee shop. It would be really interesting to continue telling those stories. Uh, and they're still very much in the pipeline. Those continuations of stories. So we'll see if they reach the light of day.
Are you still working on the play, that specific play, or are you thinking about other
Well,
stories and other characters to tell?
I had a mindset of that play. You look back on the first thing you wrote, and you're like, this is not the best thing in the world. I know I was saying I could retool it and reimagine it, or I could just move on from here. And I think since I wanted to build on those characters' lives in this world that I created, I said I would just leave that there. I'll leave
Hmm.
that piece there, and the future stories will include those characters individually. A couple of those characters come from different places, and maybe there's a scene that takes them back to the coffee shop. You
Hmm.
know, as a tie-in. So we'll see.
What do you think was the most personally rewarding aspect of that first foray into playwriting and seeing the play produced? And what did you walk away with that let you know I've touched on something really important artistically and creatively for myself here? Was it creating, putting a bunch of people together in a box and seeing how they interacted? Is that
I think I I listened to an interview where an artist said something along the lines of a deadline focuses the lights. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, I get it. So it's like for this, it was due, this project was due. And so that's what kind of lit the fire to say, let's get this done. And even when I started Represented Theatre Company, the mindset was, I have to book this venue almost a year in advance. And once I book this venue, it's like the clock starts ticking. And so let's have an idea of what's in there, of what's going to be in that space, and let's work towards that opening night. And at the start of this, I think I was, I don't know, naive, maybe ignorant, or just openly optimistic about how to make this happen, because I was in the drama club all through high school. And the earliest time I was on stage was in 4th grade. I played a cop and I had 2 lines and plastic handcuffs. But I remember, thinking like, this isn't, the difference between high school and being out here as a company is that I'm aware of how much things cost. And whereas before, some of this was kind of hidden from us, where we just knew we had to bring all these things together. So where else, only in high school can you have a stage crew of 18 people,
Right. And a shop that looks like, yeah.
And a shop that is the shop class.
A scene shop,
literally,
right?
literally employed the shop class to build the sets. So we had that space, and it was right off the theater, so it was so convenient. And then getting out into the world, thinking like, oh wait, I need a tech director, and we need to have a venue. We need to have a space where pieces of the set can be built, and we need to have a place to store costumes and props. We don't have that room that was like this extra classroom, in high school and in college. And and we didn't have access to the space. We didn't have the venue to start rehearsing in. In high school, we were on stage from the first day, whereas here, you're trying to take over you're trying to figure out when it's cost effective enough to, when the cost aligns for you to move into the space so that you can start, teching the show. So it was all pretty interesting.
But do you think,
And I'm glad I
Darnelle, I
did.
mean, so many people that I've talked to that are producers, small theater producers or whatever, you hear this a lot, and that is, I don't know whether I was naive, or I don't know whether I was, et cetera, fill in the blank with the adjective or your choice, blind, but I hear that all the time. And I do think it feels like it does take a certain amount of, we're just going to, as you say, there's a deadline. We have a venue, we have to fill it. We know what we're going to do. And you move forward and you figure it out as you go along, which doesn't mean there aren't other ways to do it. But I do think a lot of small theaters that have happen in exactly that trajectory. And you figure it out as you do it.
Yeah. And I guess and maybe early on, because we didn't have, even though we were taking drama class, we were not learning theater production. We weren't learning about how to be the business. And I've talked to students from University of the Arts who graduated and didn't have an idea of how to be a business. So like, we weren't really talking about that part. We were giving them the tools to exist in this space, and just assuming that you're going to go work for someone else's company. I was like, well, what if I want to be the company? Oh, well, you have to do that work on your own, or you have to go somewhere else for that. We don't start with that kind of foundation, which I think is also why it's so hard to get the necessary funding to produce these shows, is because we don't understand from the door that there is an expense here, and it is important to make sure that all of those bases are covered. Even as earlier producers, we end up getting our friends in, we end up getting people we know in, and I always had a mindset of, I have a short window of time where I can get people in here for very little money. After that, when we make money, we have to pay people. But as long as they see me, doing like 2 or 3 of these jobs, they know that I'm not driving around in a fancy car, with all the money, and they're not getting any. there there really isn't any. And there were times early on where, you know, I think at the time when I booked at Studio 5, I remember Jessica Doheny
Mhm.
was the company manager, and I would hand Jessica a check and say on Tuesday or on yeah Tuesday when we moved in and say it'd be really great if you held on to this check as long as possible, you
Yeah.
know, because
Yeah.
we're just trying to make sure we have
The
all of our
flow.
bases
Yeah.
covered. I
Right.
was like, I know you need it by Tuesday, but I don't start making money until Friday. So,
Right. Right.
you know,
Is that one of the reasons that you ended up heading to NYU to study arts administration?
yes, partially because I had sort of a broken education. You know, I knew that theater and arts and culture was going to be my focus, but I was encouraged to pursue technology. Like, you know, I remember my grandma would say, do something in computers. And I would say, like, what do you mean? I'm going to physically be inside a computer? Like, what do you mean by that? You know, to do something in computers. And I ended up moving towards technology. And once I had the mindset of I could sell socks online if I can navigate the web.
Mhm.
So I I do see this as something that would be really helpful for me. And earlier on, I said I wanted to be well-rounded in the arts. So I took jobs that were that the skills required were also useful skills in theater. So if I worked in a museum and I worked in the box office, now I understand front of house operations. So when I'm producing my own productions, I know how to manage my own box office or automate my own box office so that this is something I don't have to worry about. You know, I was thinking about marketing, promotion, like uh, there was a time where we would go to quite a bit of networking events. There haven't been as many over the past couple of years, but I remember it felt like we were going to networking events all the time. And it was like it was important to have a business card and to be out there and talk to people. But now it's all online, so we're connecting to each other virtually, and we're not really making those connections the way we were before,
Mhm.
which I guess is why we look forward to the big events like the Barrymores and like opening night, you know, because those are our opportunities to network and, you know, also have a couple of drinks and feel a little
And celebrate.
bit more comfortable in having the conversations and whatnot.
I remember, and I think you were at this meeting. I remember one over in the playground over at the Adrian, and I think, and it was way back when, and they were talking
Hmm.
about here's how you use Twitter. You guys better get on the
Yep.
bus and learn how to
Hmm.
tweet because, I mean, that's how
I
long ago we're talking about. But I'm sure I remember,
wow,
people
that
remember those
was
events.
yes, that was. I feel like that was a spark meeting. It
Yeah.
was either 2008, 2009, and I remember because I was there with our original host, Chris Morse, our original Rep Radio host, and I asked the room if they saw any value in podcasts. And I remember the feedback I was getting was that while there is value in it, it seems like there's a lot of work in it for little return. And so Chris and I looked at each other and we were like, we got it. Because
That's a
we
yes.
don't have no competition. Yeah,
Yeah.
so, you know, we felt good about that. And I remember us walking away from that saying, okay, so we're not competing.
Yeah.
Let's develop that mindset that we're not competing at all. We're just, this is what we have to present. We're putting it out there and we hope it finds its audience. And it was really helpful to kind of have that mindset because we did end up having people who were consistent listeners, some who became hosts over
Mhm.
time, who were giving us feedback. Like I remember early on, Liam Castellan would reach out and say, "Hey, the audio was a little light in that one part, and I couldn't really make it out. I just want to let you know, just in case you didn't realize that, like, he was giving me feedback, and I was like, thank you so much. And then ultimately he ended up being a host for a season or two.
This is on
So
your
I,
podcast, your rep radio.
yeah, on
Yeah.
rep radios. So I thought that that was really great. And going out to, like I said, going to opening nights and you know, talking to people and them saying, oh yeah, I listen to rep radio while I'm doing laundry. Or I was like, and that's kind of like the podcast win. If
Mhm,
someone's
mhm.
doing housework while while they're listening to your podcast, I think that's a win.
Yeah.
Um, so it was really cool to hear people that hear that people were listening, and I knew that people were listening because I had all the metrics, but at the same time I was still not convinced. I was still very much like, who's listening?
Mhm.
And whoever's listening to this, great. But I wasn't playing to an audience, and I think that that allowed us to stay authentic and to stay around for so long.
How is your, staying on the rep radio topic, how has what you have, how has your thinking, has your thinking changed about the way in which you do the show? Do you approach it in the same way that you did when you started it?
Mhm. I've I definitely have a system, or a cadence, if you will. I do feel like um, I think I had a conversation a couple months ago where I said I guess I never realized that, you know, Darnelle Radford, host of Rep Radio or Broad Street Review podcast, is a character I play.
Hmm.
I definitely turn on something when I do my introduction. Even though it is me the whole time, there is something about it that I do, something switches on. I'm more in tune to what is being said. I'm hanging on every word because I'm trying to figure out where to steer this conversation next to keep it exciting and interesting. And I have notes, but my notes are loose. You know, the notes are in case the guest doesn't know what to say. I have something that can kind of steer them. But usually, you know, I started listening to other podcasts and news broadcasts, and realized the value of open-ended questions. Tell me more about the process, and then
It's
let
a,
somebody nerd out about it. And you know,
so
I always thought that was great.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean,
So
that's the medical education, right? Part of it, where with
yeah.
the students,
Hmm.
you're trying to, you know, you're trying to elicit the story, you're trying to get the narrative and the just jumping back a little bit to Spark, the which was the, you were involved in Spark for many years
Hmm.
with Greg Campbell, and which was an initiative designed to illuminate the work of smaller theater companies, you know, in Philadelphia. And we were talking about this before the show, but that felt like a really very fertile time in back in the day when a lot of small theaters were popping up, and it was very focused on making sure people knew all of the depth and breadth and the choices they had. Do you think
Yeah.
that something like a Spark will be back? Do you think the time could hold something like that now?
I think I think I think someone has to want to do that work. Um, you know, I when when before Theater Philadelphia was Theater Philadelphia, when it was the Theater Alliance of Greater Philadelphia, when we uh, fondly referred to it as Tag P, I remembered saying, you know, you know, the sort of tagline of the alliance is, "So you want to be the next great theater company," and by being a member of the alliance, there were resources here that were designed to help you become the next great theater company. There were various, you know, committees we could join. There were meetings we could go to where we could learn from others' successes and failures and challenges and opportunities. And you know, while Theater Philadelphia is more of a marketing arm now, I think that there is room for an organization that is local, that does help new companies emerge. And we have them in the region with things like with fiscal sponsors like Fractured Atlas, for example. But Fractured Atlas is now completely web-based. Like they don't even have a physical location anymore. So really it's a website that we sign into. It may as well be Patreon, or something like that. But I do think there are still holes in how to successfully run a theater company, that if we're not paying attention or we don't have an opportunity to talk in depth with artists in the community, we're not going to pick up this information. Because there's just some things like, you might know how to navigate, a relationship with the University of Penn to communicate to them the needs of your organization and how they, how they can help you by lending space or making space available, So, but that's not something we can pick up in a book. It's something that we have to hear from someone, maybe on a panel, or a future guest on Into the Absurd, to understand those things. So if we have a collection of that information, I think it's going to be really helpful to go back to all of this, because I know for Rep Radio and for Broad Street Review podcasts, I do ask about the process. Take us in the room. Let's go from page to stage. Tell us about this whole thing. And I think it is valuable to understand those parts and to not shy away from the challenges that you had, because otherwise we're just thinking that this is all brilliant and perfect. It was stellar from the original idea, and then so what you see is the stellar we knew it was going to be. It's like we need to understand that, oh, we did not know where to get that set piece from, and we called around and we went everywhere, and thanks to these prop shops that have come up that didn't exist 10 years ago, we were able to find this piece that was more period, or that was more fitting to the time frame that we're trying to tell story in. These are things like, where do we get this resource from if we don't actually talk to someone? And I think that is one thing that is really great about Philadelphia. Philadelphia is really a community that wants to help itself grow and be successful. You can walk into a room and say you're a new company, and there are artists telling you who you need to know, who you need to talk to, what venues are great to consider. And no one's thinking about, oh no, new competition, so let's ignore that. Let's say, oh, it's going to be tough, good luck. We don't do that. We just say, welcome, come on in. Hey, have you met so-and-so? This is a new artist who's just coming up. They're going to do great things, so pay attention to that. Keep an eye out for these names. I feel that here with us, and I think that's why it's so hard. It's so hard to leave Philadelphia, even if work takes you outside of the community, and that's why it's also so hard to hear that there's even more problems in a community that appears to be so inclusive, but still has a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
During your time as another hat that you wore for many, many years as a Barrymore voter and judge, what did you walk away from with that experience in terms of your own personal growth, or in terms of what you learned about theater, or what you learned about that process in Philadelphia?
What I learned from that was that there is more than one way in. If you're thinking about the theater as a house, physical structure, it has a front door, it has a rear but it also has windows. And there are so many ways to get in to this that you can't just look at it through with tunnel vision. You have to see it from all angles. And if you do that, you will find a way to appreciate everything that comes to a stage. So I'm often trying to find the thing that interests me instead of saying to someone, like, we'll have reviewers who do not like the play at all. And they walk into the room not liking the play. They did not like the play, even though they accepted the job. So they don't like the play. So half of their review is about how they don't like the play. And it's like, yes, but what about this production company? What about this director's vision? What about the intentions here? What about how they told this story? So there's so many other ways to get into this besides saying, I don't like this piece. So the same thing with being a Barrymore voter. I can remember one of my earlier assignments was at the Khyber, and the Khyber is a bar. It's a dive bar. Upstairs, the show was upstairs, and in the show was in 3 parts. And in the second part, we had to actually pick up our chairs and move to another room. And I remembered saying, like, this is unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable. You know, and when I submitted my ballot at the time, I was not favorable. And the email I received basically told me to think on it, because I had returned this so quickly, and my response was not really about the experience overall. And that was the best feedback I ever received, because when I sat and thought about the piece, I said, now I get it. Now I get why it was in a bar. Now I get why we had to move. And so now I understand that that was a part of the storytelling. Whereas before I had this mindset of, this is not a proscenium, you know, this isn't a proscenium, and how dare you make us move our chairs, failure, you know? But I had to think deeper about it. And, you know, so I moved into everything else with a greater curiosity than I had in that earlier experience. And I always go back to that. I think that I can't even tell you what date that was. Maybe 2006-ish or something, but I remember
I
being
think I
way
know the
back
show you're
there.
talking about. Yeah.
It was called it was at Enish Nua,
Yeah, I was going to say
actually.
it's Tom's show. I thought so, because I was at that
It
show.
was
Yeah.
Crazy Gary's Mobile Disco. That's the name of the piece. And I just you know, because I had never been to the Khyber. I didn't even know why the Khyber was such a destination. You know, what is this thing about dive bars that people are so excited about, you know? I just thought the space was like not you know, right. But then I didn't understand the intention here. And so once I looked at it differently, I love site specific pieces. And I love how taking all of that in, even up to one of the last productions I saw, which was Passover of Theatre Exile, was out in Hawthorne Park. And the atmosphere of Hawthorne Park is very much alive. Everything is going on. We heard police sirens. There was a helicopter that seemed to be right on cue, you know, at a pivotal moment in the play, and it sort of lent to the whole experience. So we weren't trying to tune all of that out. We were aware of those things, and those things made the experience even better. And I also remember being on the second stage at the Adrian, and every curtain speech would have to ask for forgiveness because there was a dance studio upstairs. And so the noise would bleed in. And so we had to forgive that. so that we could give ourselves to the production. And if they didn't say that, we would have been so upset about the thumping we would have heard and said, I've been completely taken out of this because of that. So I even did the same thing in podcasts. I said, you know what, if you're in a coffee shop, tell them you're in a coffee shop. So that way, if you hear glasses and if you hear the machines going, they know we're in the coffee shop. So now they can feel like they're sitting at a table next to us, just listening in. And I think it adds to the experience. Instead of trying to cut all of that out, we were being complimented by all of that.
Yeah, the sounds of life.
Yeah, and it became so much more valuable.
Yeah. Did you find it as you were out for those many years as a judge or as a voter? Did you find yourself having to self-correct a lot or sort of check your emotional place in the same way that you did, with the Inishnua show? I mean, did you have to say, no, wait a minute, which I think is a really great position to find yourself in, that you're aware of it, and that, but because that's got to be hard to be seeing so many shows and going night after, the work and the amount of hours and just what is put in. You obviously love it, but was that something that you had to like come back to sometimes and redirect your thinking or open your curiosity more?
Definitely. There's a little bit of how this makes me feel, but once I process that, I've got to hover above it and make sense of the whole thing. We know that an actor portraying a child molester on stage is not a child molester in real life. And none of us should be in love with this kind of storyline. But we have to process how this makes us feel, whether we have some personal connection to this storyline or just how this makes us feel in general about it being wrong. But the story, the story may actually humanize the predator, the character that is the child molester, and in a way that we would never allow in real life. If we just heard the news, we would not really care about where this person came from before they did this unspeakable thing. So I saw that as a huge value in theater. It just allows us to kind of, allows us to look at it in a different way and then think about, let's come into this space with no judgment and think about the story as a whole, instead of just saying, I am immediately turned off by this scene, by this moment. And then think about it as a whole and say, the reason I felt so strongly about that scene, about that moment, about that character, is because they did such a good job on stage portraying this character, this moment. And then, as a voter, we were looking at each of those productions, and in an attempt to identify excellence in the production as it stands, not in comparison to other productions, but just this production. So we're looking at this saying, are there elements of excellence in this? Were there completely successful executions of direction, of vision, of lighting, of sound, of acting that that would allow for this piece to be pitched up to the judges for more detailed review. And that was some of the feedback I gave in one of the Barrymore voter meetings, like a very early one. Everyone was talking about their process, like, oh, so this is what I do. I have a sheet and I do this, and based on the shows that I saw at the beginning of the show, I would figure it out, and I would have my own kind of ranking system. And I was like, that's not what we're here for. We're walking in with a blank slate, and we're just in search of excellence. So we're just discovering It's all about discovery. This is not in comparison to what we saw yesterday or what we're going to see tomorrow, or just the quality of a production company that you already know has more money, has more resources, you know, has an actor that you've loved and everything else. We're not comparing it to that. We're looking at this moment here and saying, is there excellence in this? And I think that shone through when a smaller company would be recognized for, you know, like lead actress would be recognized in a production that we know internally as producers, as artists, that, you know, that the production didn't have a huge budget, that, you know, scenic design wasn't the greatest execution, but this actor's presence, portrayal was excellent or was worthy of further review, you know? So yeah, I thinking about, I can actually say that being a Barrymore voter really helped me to open my eyes and to just try to find, I'm not necessarily looking for excellence out of everything, but just finding the things that I can appreciate or my takeaways from every experience. If I'm still walking down the street with my plus one, if I'm on the train and we're still talking about this is the moment that, you know, the judges need to focus on. This is what I hope an audience will come and see so that we can all be a part of this conversation.
Mhm.
And so I try to approach the art with that mindset. I want to find something that I can hold on to, and I want to focus, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about its relevancy. I want to talk about how you planned 3 years ago to produce this show, and right here I'm finding relevance in it right now based on what was in the news 3 weeks ago, or what was in the news yesterday, or what is going on in my own neighborhood. And I think that that allows for other people to find a way in to work that they may not necessarily feel is for them.
There's a question here, Darnelle. Do you think that the Barrymore judges can or should be trained to have this objectivity that you speak of, to look for the excellence and just not what you personally like? So is there a training component in that, or is that something that's happening already and something it sounds like that you talk about quite a bit?
I think it is. I think it is happening. I know that people often get frustrated, but you know, the process, not an individual, the process sent 8 people to the same show, you know, and we don't know that all 8 people are going to the show at the same time. We're not all sitting in the same row. We're not necessarily communicating with each other during this process. We are taking this seriously. So we do enter into the space as individuals, and we take notes, or we don't take notes, or we walk out with whatever, you know, really stuck with us. And we you know, we give it a grade based on that. But it's 8 individual people who came together to say this needs to be pitched up to, you know, the judges. So I don't know, like I would often hear about how the Barrymore's is rigged and so on. I'm like, how? Because I'm a Barrymore voter, and I was not a part of the conversation that involved the rigging. I don't know how that happens. I think the process is well done, but it is something that people have to be reminded of, because we do come in with our own personal things. And because we can hear that in regular conversations we have with people, where someone says, no, I can't, there's nothing you can, there's no way you can explain this that will make me think about it any differently. And I said, yes, but okay, that's your opinion. But now you got to hover above it with your opinion and then everything else. And now what do you think? So yeah, I think it's already there, but it is something we definitely have to be reminded of. Yeah.
Would you find in with the other 8 people that you were, huddling with after, um, or did you need to huddle in that way? Did you find that oftentimes you had a lot in common, that you would be feeling similarly, or is it more
So
often that the opinions are really divergent? Because that's got to be a difficult and challenging and rewarding process to work through.
so so as a voter and at one point a nominator, um, I had never been a judge, partially because the judges' expectation of time was just way too much. If you don't have a vehicle, it's really hard to be a judge because sometimes you have to go at a moment's notice. And I wanted a little bit more control over it, so I often stayed in the nominator voter camp. So in that camp, you don't really get to interact with other voters and nominators who have gone to the shows, unless you're having a conversation way after the fact. But
Mhm.
I don't think I've ever spoken. I have never spoke with a voter or a nominator, um, before they had submitted their ballot. So uh, usually, I always brought a plus one because I wanted to make sure that my view wasn't the only view.
Mhm.
you know I wanted to, I often would, if it wasn't one of my co-hosts, it was a friend who is interested in the arts but may not be as hardcore as we are, who can go into this and say, and I can say, okay, so what did you think? you know
Mhm.
you stayed awake, or sometimes
It's a
lighting
good sign.
sometimes lighting puts people to sleep, depending on times. What did you think? What things stood out for you? And I want to think about all of that too. And then I'll go home because I think we had 24 hours before we had to submit our ballot. So I could sit at work and, on a break, submit my ballot and actually think about everything I had thought of instead of walking out like, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now, submitting my ballot. I
Mhm.
don't think I've ever done that. Um, but yeah, it was interesting to have those conversations before thinking about it altogether. And I'm also looking around the room too, to see how the audience is responding as well. To say, okay, that was well executed. Look at this audience; they're going nuts over this moment.
Mm.
Or Theater Exile, for example, they they tend to Theater Exile and Interact tend to upset their audiences a lot because the work they're putting on stage is like, it's real,
Mhm.
and it's tough. And so there are people who will be upset by what they've experienced here, and sometimes they will let them know in the lobby.
Mhm.
And I remember being at a show at Theater Exile, and a woman spoke to Deb Block and said, I love this theater, but I hate this show. Something like that. And I was like, okay, interesting. Because I know the moment. Or something happens in a scene and people walk out, you know.
Mm.
Oh, I can't. They have to go. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, well executed right
Mhm.
there, you know. So I'm paying attention to that too. Um, and those were moments that, I could then take with me as I'm sitting there filling out my ballot, saying like,
Mhm.
how did I feel? How did the audience feel? Was this well executed? Are we supposed to be upset by this moment, or you know feeling emotional, but whimsical and hopeful in this moment? Like, how did the audience respond, and was I close to what the audience felt, or did we all feel it? Then sometimes you can actually sit in the theater and see, uh, and experience a nominee for overall production of a play or a musical, and feel it right there
Mm.
in in the way you feel. at key moments of the production. And it has always been amazing to go to the Barrymores and to know that you were right
Mm.
about those overall nominations. And I remember being in the lobby saying about some shows that I think I just saw a nominee for best overall production of the play.
Mm.
And being actually validated. And those were the things that let me know that whatever my process is, this is the right process. I am thinking along the same lines. And so I'm not far off at all.
I love what you said about going into the production I'm paraphrasing it, but in search of excellence. You're looking for, you're there expecting to be transported and taken to that place, as opposed to looking for reasons, the
Yeah.
other way. Not that people do that, but I think this sort of open curiosity and just like waiting for the ray of sunshine to hit you allows you to be ready and open for any possibility that comes through. I
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about your work in the work in New York on with your I've got my paper and it's over here, but the work with Broadway, with Mitch that you're working on.
With the business of Broadway.
The Business of Broadway, sorry.
Mhm.
Yeah, tell us
Yeah.
about that project and what it was designed to do and
Mhm.
how it might
So
be changing.
that was an interesting thing, the way it all formed. So when I think 2013, I moved to Jersey City when I worked for the fruit-themed technology company who gave me an opportunity in New York. And while I was there, I said, I want to continue education while I'm here, so let me look for arts administration programs that I can get into. And NYU had an arts administration certification program. And I was like, who doesn't want NYU credit? So I jumped on that. And one of the classes I took was about social media marketing. And the class is filling up. And Mitch Weiss, who is an adjunct at NYU, sits in the back of the class to audit this one. And his class is the Business of Broadway, but it's based on whether enough people sign up for the class. So at this particular time, not enough people signed up for the class. So he audited this class and I think a grant writing course with me as well. And the instructor of the class said, "Oh, you should meet Mitch Weiss. He teaches the Business of Broadway, and since you have a theater background, you should know each other." And immediately, it was like immediate our connection. So after those classes, Mitch and I would go to like a nearby coffee shop and talk about the class, the things that we found value in, and so on. And at the time, he was telling me that he was writing a book on the Business of Broadway. I don't even know if that was the title at the time, but I remembered saying to him, by the end of this book, I need to feel confident enough to be in the room with people producing on Broadway. Even if the last page said, now you know how $15 million is spent to get to opening night. And little did I know, I was actually helping him sort of shape this piece along with other people who were giving him feedback as well. And when the book launched, I said, wouldn't it be great if you continued to update the book, because now that it's up there, things continue to change. So after the book launched in 2015, which I think it was April of 2015, we started we started updating those chapters on a website called justlearnsomething.us. And Just Learn Something was going to be this opportunity to teach people who wanted to get out to New York, who wanted to pursue theater in New York, like from actual people who are working in the business. So we called it an unschool for theater, for entertainers, because Mitch had come across a lot of people who just didn't know where to go. And he, even to this day, will get on calls with individuals who are trying to figure some things out. So, and he knew all of these people that, you know, I didn't know their names, but they were like big names on Broadway. And so we were thinking about how to, you know, do all of that. And so we started updating the book every month. So whenever something changed with the union particulars, we would put it in there and so on. And here we are in, you know, 2021, and we are still updating the Business of Broadway. Please, publisher, we need a version 2 after this long intermission. It's time. We need a new book.
But you're updating it? Don't you update it on your site though, Darnelle?
Yes.
On
so
Em3ry?
we had it, so yeah, so it had its own website at one point, and then you know, over the past couple of years, I started folding all of these projects into their things, because Represented Theater Company is a theater company. And you know, I was like, what do I do with these podcast ideas and all these other little things? So that's when I created Em3ry as a place to house all of those things, because I don't want to let go of my ideas. I love my darlings, and I want to find a place for them all to continue existing. So I started doing the work of just sort of folding everything in. I imported everything from justlearnsomething.us to Em3ry, and so now that all that back information is there, we continue to update that still. And it was just useful because the podcasts are about the arts. So why not have the information that's tied to the book here as well? It didn't make sense. This totally separate website was doing exactly what I was trying to do here. Make sense of the business. So yeah, so we update that monthly on the website, and I actually have I have some updates to put up for next week as well, and that has been really useful to see what kind of conversations are being had behind the scenes, what lack of conversations are being had behind the scenes, and just understanding the changes that are happening, you know, on Broadway, so that we can have a better understanding of what's going on here.
What do you think is the single piece of advice that you would offer to someone if they were considering starting a small theater company, say here in Philadelphia?
I feel like
Is it
it's
the
like
old,
a running.
if there's anything else you can possibly conceivably see yourself doing, do it?
Yeah, it's that, and marry rich, I feel like is always a comment that's said. But also, you know, if you're starting a theater company today, your mindset should be that there is no competition, that you're not in competition. Because if you feel like you're competing, then you're going to stray from your artistic vision, because you're trying to compete or you're trying to keep up. And that's not why you got into this. You got in because you want to tell stories. You want to be on the side of telling stories. So go tell stories. It doesn't matter that we have 40 other companies. You know, at one point we had like 150 companies, you know, that were actively and very, you know, we saw them all out there doing this. So we didn't feel like there was internal conversation that the market is saturated, but I don't know why we were ever saying that. Like, okay, so do you want to tell Temple to stop training new actors and artists? Do we want to tell Villanova to just hang it up because we have enough? Like, that's not what we do. So we have to look at it as we have something authentic to contribute. And we're not trying to compete. Like, I'm not trying to be IRC.
Mhm.
You know, I want to be out there with IRC, and I want to celebrate IRC as well. But I have my own ideas of how to tell stories. You know, I don't think we ever walk into a Shakespeare piece saying, "Oh, I've seen this. I know what happens at the end of Romeo and Juliet." It's all about the journey, and we want to know about this interpretation as well. We want to see these artists tell this story as well,
Mhm.
and see if there's something we pick up on that we didn't pick up on before. And it's so familiar because we already know this story that we are picking up on more things about it now. And how is it relevant to today? What is the urgency of telling this particular Shakespeare piece today? You know, and that's why three companies can produce the same Shakespeare piece, you know, in the same season, and we will go see it because you know, we might see one that's like, what if we set this in 40s Cuba, you know, or what if we set this in present day and everyone's wearing street clothes, or what if we try to be as period as possible for this? So all of that, you know, we're seeing it in so many different ways that it is allowing us to digest it. So there's so much value in it. And if you purchase scripts online, like if you go to Dramatist now, you will see that Dramatist already has a list of the plays that are being produced all over the country right now. That doesn't mean that you can't produce that play. It just means that that play is being produced all over the country. So if you want to produce it, it might be helpful to experience one of those productions, or read the reviews or something like that, so that you have a more informed um, you know, idea of the direction you're going in. It's like, oh, I see what they chose to focus on in there because they're trying to highlight this element here, and the way they did that is with color and lighting and sound, and every time, you know, the specific things they did in that production. Whereas this other company is trying to focus on this other element, and they use these interesting devices to tell that same story. So we want to experience all of those viewpoints, and we should be approaching it all like that. So, I mean, I think if a new company wants to emerge, reach out to IRC to get on ITA, and reach out to Rep Radio. Come talk to us, because, you know, let's nerd out about why are you interested in producing theater, and how you got your start, and what kind of help do you need? How can we help you succeed? How can we continue following your work and supporting you along the way? So, you know, yeah, if more the merrier, please
I love that idea,
join us.
Darnelle. Yeah, that, I mean, as you were talking earlier in the show about just about yeah, when and it's still happening, but when we would sort of have very organized marketing, you know, sort of marketing and
Mhm.
networking events, and there is something real palpable that comes out of that. Just ideas and knowing that you're all sort of journeying on, you know, a little bit of the same path. You know, there's so many things that have to happen to put a show up, but the infinite number of ways in which they can happen, and as you say, what that product looks like at the other end. And I think it's that excitement and enthusiasm. And certainly thanks very much to Rep Radio and the work you're doing at Broad Street for helping the small companies along the way to be seen by people, and to know, you know, to know that to have people know that companies are out there.
Yeah.
Well, the dinner bell is ringing, so I'm gonna have to say goodbye. But I've really enjoyed talking to you, Darnelle, and I'm very excited to see what, you know, what's happening for Rep Radio and Represented Theater and Em3ry and all the projects that you're working on. It's so necessary, and it's exciting to have these conversations now that we can actually have the conversations and not break down,
Yeah. Yeah.
thinking
It
about
was
it.
great to be a guest for a change.
Yeah, it was really fun, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully out in the community and
Definitely.
helping to build it all again. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. And thanks to all of you for being here. We're going to continue this theater conversation next week with Mark Williams, who you know from many years here at the IRC and many companies around Philadelphia. He's a puppet and a props master, but now he is at my old alma mater at the University of Maryland, and he's in the graduate studies program there, and he's working in media, and we're going to talk to him about design and his graduate studies that he's doing and what's on the docket for Mark in the years to come, combining all of his theater knowledge and experience and getting into a new dimension with so much happening online and technical. So that's our conversation for next week. It's Mark Williams, and I hope that you have a very safe week ahead. And thanks so very much for joining us. We hope to see you at the table next week. Be well.